Have you ever felt like someone was watching you a little too closely? Like their compliment felt more like a threat? This nurse thought she was just doing her job, until two words changed everything. What she discovered about his wife will leave you questioning everyone around you. It was a routine Tuesday morning when Nita Whitaker stepped into the marble foyer of the Hudson estate. The 34-year-old hospice nurse had seen wealth before, but nothing like this. 12,000 square feet of old money stretching along Maine's coastline, where timber fortunes built dynasties and secrets ran deeper the Atlantic. Arthur Hudson, 68, sat in his mahogany-paneled study, waiting for his monthly checkup. Nita had been coming here for 3 weeks, primarily to care for his wife Evelyn, who was dying from something doctors called atypical neurotoxicity. As Nita wrapped the blood pressure cuff around Arthur's arm, she noticed his hands, steady as a surgeon's, not a tremor in sight. Strange, considering his wife could barely hold a teacup. That's when he leaned closer. His breath smelled of bourbon and almonds as he whispered, "You're beautiful." His eyes lingered on her wedding band, the one she still wore 2 years after her husband Ben died in that hit-and-run accident. The way Arthur said it wasn't romantic. It was calculating, possessive, like he was already planning something. Nita had learned to trust her instincts during her 15 years in nursing. Growing up in a trailer park, working 3 jobs to pay for nursing school, then watching medical bills from Ben's funeral pile up faster than her paychecks, she knew when someone was measuring her worth. But this felt different. Dangerous. That night, reviewing Evelyn's medical charts at her cramped apartment, Nita noticed something that made her stomach drop. The lab reports weren't matching up. Blood tests from St. Bridget's private hospital showed elevated thallium levels, a deadly neurotoxin. But identical tests from Willowbrook General showed nothing. When she cross-referenced the dates, a pattern emerged that would haunt her sleep. The thallium only appeared in samples taken when Arthur was alone with his wife. If you've ever felt that gut instinct something was wrong, hit that like button, because Nita's about to discover that trusting her intuition might be the only thing keeping her alive. Nita couldn't sleep. Those lab reports kept flashing through her mind like a broken neon sign. She'd handled hundreds of patients with neurological disorders, but thallium poisoning? That wasn't random. That was deliberate. The next morning, she drove to the Willowbrook Library and began her investigation. What she found in the newspaper archives made her hands shake. Arthur Hudson had a history that read like a true crime documentary. First victim, Lillian Hudson, 2001. Arthur's first wife died of cardiac arrhythmia just 3 weeks after updating her will. The timing was convenient. Lillian had inherited a textile fortune from her father. The autopsy records mysteriously vanished from the county clerk's office during a routine filing reorganization. Second victim, Henry Greer, 2015. Arthur's business partner collapsed during a fishing trip. The death certificate blamed acute cyanide exposure from cherry pits. Nita called Dr. James Morrison, a toxicologist in Portland, who laughed at the explanation. Cherry pits. You'd need to eat 2 pounds of them. That's not accidental, that's murder disguised as bad luck. Now Evelyn was dying the same way, slowly, methodically, with medical records that told different stories. Nita's phone buzzed. A text from Arthur. "Nita, could you come in early today? Evelyn's having a rough morning. Your presence always calms her." The message felt warm, caring, but Nita now recognized manipulation wrapped in kindness. She arrived at the estate to find Arthur waiting in the driveway, holding a manila envelope. "I wanted to give you this personally," he said, his voice gentle as a father's. Evelyn insisted. Inside was a life insurance policy, $12 million, with Nita listed as the sole beneficiary. Nita's blood turned to ice water. This wasn't generosity, this was a framed job. When Evelyn died, all evidence would point to the grieving nurse who'd somehow convinced a dying woman to leave her everything. The perfect murder weapon. Medical access and a motive handed to her on a silver platter. "Arthur, I can't accept this," Nita stammered. "Evelyn won't take no for an answer," he replied, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "She sees you as the daughter she never had." That afternoon, Nita sat in her car outside the estate, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel. She could drive away, quit her job, let someone else handle the Hudsons. She had $37,000 in medical debt from Ben's treatment, a mortgage 3 months behind, and a car that needed new brakes. Walking away meant financial ruin, but staying meant becoming Arthur's next victim. She thought about Ben, who died when a drunk driver ran a red light. The case went cold because the driver had connections, money, influence, just like Arthur. How many people had suffered because good people chose to look the other way? But here's what Arthur didn't know about Nita. Growing up poor had taught her that rich people weren't untouchable. They just wanted you to believe they were. Her mother had cleaned houses for wealthy families, and she'd learned their secrets behind the designer clothes and perfect lawns. They were just as scared, just as vulnerable as everyone else. Nita turned off the engine. She wasn't running. Evelyn deserved justice. Lillian deserved justice. Henry Greer deserved justice. And if Arthur thought he could use her grief and desperation against her, he was about to learn that some nurses fight back. Drop a comment if you think Nita should run, or if she should keep investigating, because what happens next will determine whether justice wins or wealth silences another victim forever. Nita spent the next 3 days becoming a detective. She called in favors, tracked down retired medical examiners, and even convinced a former lab technician to meet her at a diner outside town. What she discovered made her realize Arthur wasn't just a killer, he was a master craftsman of death. Lillian Hudson's story was written in medical records that almost didn't exist. The original autopsy had been performed by Dr. Patricia Hayes, who retired mysteriously in 2002. Nita found her living in a nursing home in Vermont, her mind still sharp at 83. "I remember that case," Dr. Hayes whispered, glancing around the recreation room. "Beautiful woman, only 45. Her heart just stopped," they said. "But I found petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes, classic sign of suffocation. When I wrote that in my report, it vanished, replaced with a clean version citing natural causes." Who replaced it? Dr. Philip Mercer. Same man who signed off on Henry Greer's death certificate. Dr. Mercer, the director of St. Bridget's private hospital, the same facility producing Evelyn's falsified blood work. Nita's investigation had led her straight to Arthur's personal physician and oldest friend. She found Mercer at his lakeside cabin, a 40-minute drive from Willowbrook. The 60-year-old doctor answered the door in fishing gear, his face paling when he saw Nita holding a syringe filled with Evelyn's latest blood sample. "Dr. Mercer, I need you to run this yourself. No assistants, no technicians, just you. Nita, I don't know what you think you're. Run it, or I take it to Channel 8 News." His hands trembled as he led her to his home lab, a setup that would make university researchers jealous. When the results appeared on his computer screen, Mercer collapsed into his chair like a punctured balloon. "Thallium levels at 0.23 milligrams per liter," he read aloud. "Fatal concentration. But your hospital reported 0 traces." Mercer's confession poured out like water through a broken dam. Arthur had discovered his role in a Medicare fraud scheme, billing for procedures never performed, splitting payments with phantom clinics. $2.3 million in illegal charges that could have sent Mercer to federal prison. He owns judges, police chiefs, even the coroner, Mercer admitted. Half of Willowbrook's government is in his pocket. He threatened to expose everything, unless I helped him. How many people has he killed? Lillian was the first I helped cover up. Henry Greer, I refused to touch, told Arthur I was done. But he had photos of me with coke at a medical conference in 1998. Old blackmail, but it would destroy me. The autopsy reports told a story written in blood, cover-ups and corruption that reached every level of local government. Arthur hadn't just murdered his victims, he'd systematically destroyed the justice system meant to protect them. Nita drove back to the Hudson estate, her mind racing. Evelyn's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Yesterday she couldn't lift her head. Today she was unconscious more than awake. Arthur's timeline was accelerating. As Nita checked Evelyn's vitals, Arthur appeared in the doorway with his nightly tea service, a ritual he'd performed religiously for weeks. The silver tray held delicate china and a small bottle of almond syrup. She loves the sweetness, Arthur explained, adding several drops to the steaming cup. It's the only thing that brings her comfort anymore. Nita watched him stir the tea with practiced precision. The almond scent was strong, too strong for flavoring. She'd read about bitter almond oil being used to mask the metallic taste of heavy metals. Her nursing textbooks had covered a case from 2013 where a husband used cyanide-laced almond extract to poison his wife slowly. Arthur wasn't just poisoning Evelyn. He was enjoying it. This wasn't business, it was his twisted form of entertainment. Arthur, have you always taken such good care of your wives? His smile was cold as winter fog. I take care of everyone I love, Nita. Everyone who matters to me. The threat was clear. She was next. Share this with someone who needs to hear about standing up to powerful predators, because sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who bring you tea and call it kindness. Evelyn died on a Thursday morning, just as the first snow began falling over Cedar Ridge. Nita found her peaceful, finally free from the tremors and pain that had consumed her final weeks. But as she prepared the death certificate paperwork, Arthur's behavior struck her as odd. I'll handle the arrangements, he said, already on the phone with the funeral home. Evelyn wanted a quick, private service. No autopsy, she suffered enough. That afternoon, while Arthur met with lawyers downtown, Nita returned to the estate. She told herself she was retrieving medical equipment, but truth was, she needed to search Evelyn's room. If Arthur had been poisoning his wife, there might be evidence he'd overlooked. The bedroom felt frozen in time, furniture, oil paintings, and fresh flowers Arthur had brought daily. Nita methodically checked drawers, nightstands, even the medicine cabinet. Nothing seemed out of place until she noticed scratch marks around the lock of an ornate wooden escritoire near the window. The lock had been forced recently. Someone had been searching this desk. Nita jimmied the lock with a letter opener. Inside she found 43 handwritten letters, all addressed to my dearest Margaret in Portland, Evelyn's sister. The letters told a story of growing fear and suspicion that made Nita's hands shake as she read. October 15th. Arthur insists on bringing my evening tea personally. He says the staff might forget to add my medicine, but something feels wrong about his attention. He watches me drink every drop. October 23rd, I pretended to spill my tea tonight and poured a fresh cup from the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares. Am I losing my mind, or is my husband trying to lose me? October 30th, I've started pouring the tea into the plant by my window when Arthur isn't looking. The fern is dying, Margaret. Its leaves are turning black and falling off. Whatever Arthur is putting in my tea is killing everything it touches. The final letter, dated just 3 days before Evelyn's death, contained instructions that made Nita's blood run cold. If anything happens to me, look for the safe behind the Titian painting in Arthur's study. The combination is our childhood code, MYFLOWER. Inside, you'll find proof of what he's doing. But Margaret, be careful who you trust. Arthur has friends in places where friends shouldn't exist. Nita raced to Arthur's study. The Titian painting, a dark portrait of a woman in Renaissance dress, hung slightly crooked. Behind it was a wall safe, its digital lock waiting for her input. Myflower. The safe clicked open. Inside were items that transformed her investigation into a nightmare. Vials of tea residue labeled with dates and times. A voice-activated recording device shaped like an antique brooch, and a life insurance policy, the same one Arthur had shown her, except this version was dated 2 weeks before Nita ever met the Hudsons. Arthur had chosen her, researched her, planned her involvement from the beginning. Nita activated the brooch recorder with trembling fingers. Evelyn's voice filled the study, weak but determined. Arthur brought tea again tonight. I told him I wasn't thirsty, but he insisted. Said it would help me sleep. When he left, I managed to pour most of it into this vial. If something happens to me, test this liquid. Test it for poison. The recording continued with conversations between Arthur and unknown visitors. Nita heard Dr. Mercer's voice, discussing dosage adjustments and timeline acceleration. She heard Arthur laugh as he described Nita as the perfect patsy, grieving widow, financial troubles, no family to ask questions. But the most devastating recording was Arthur's phone conversation with someone he called Judge. Nita's playing detective, but it's too late. When they find Evelyn dead and Nita inheriting millions, the story writes itself. Greedy nurse manipulates dying patient. The insurance money will never reach her account. She'll be in prison for murder before the check clears. That's when Nita realized she wasn't investigating a crime, she was preventing her own murder. Arthur hadn't just killed his wives, he'd perfected a system of framing innocent people for his crimes. The final piece of evidence was a laboratory analysis report hidden behind the insurance policy. The tea residue from Evelyn's vials contained thallium suspended in bitter almond oil, the same combination Nita had smelled on Arthur's breath that first day. Thallium was odorless and tasteless in small doses, but bitter almond oil masked any metallic aftertaste while slowly delivering poison to its victim. Arthur had been perfecting this method for decades, using Dr. Mercer to falsify blood work and corrupt officials to bury evidence. Nita copied every document, photographed every vial, and uploaded Evelyn's recordings to 3 different cloud storage accounts. If Arthur thought he could erase her like he'd erased his other victims, he was about to learn that some people refused to disappear quietly. She had 48 hours before Evelyn's funeral, 48 hours to turn the hunter into the hunted. Nita spent Friday night in her apartment, modifying a pulse oximeter with equipment borrowed from the hospital. If Arthur wanted to play doctor, she'd give him a taste of his own medicine, literally. Using a microneedle from a glucose monitor, she rigged the device to deliver a non-lethal dose of syrup of ipecac, a powerful emetic that would induce immediate vomiting. Not enough to harm Arthur, but enough to force him to expel whatever he'd consumed recently. If he'd been handling thallium, traces would appear in his stomach contents. Evelyn's funeral was held Saturday morning at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. The service was elegant, understated, exactly what Arthur wanted. No autopsy, no questions. Just a grieving widower burying his beloved wife. Nita arrived wearing her best black dress and a recording device hidden in her pearl necklace. She needed Arthur to confess, and grief made people careless with their words. After the service, mourners gathered at the estate for refreshments. Nita approached Arthur as he stood by the French doors overlooking the garden where Evelyn had loved to read. "Arthur, I'm so sorry for your loss," Nita said, her voice trembling with what anyone would mistake for grief. Evelyn was such a special woman. "She was," Arthur replied, his hand briefly touching Nita's shoulder. "And she thought the world of you. That insurance policy, I hope you'll accept it," Evelyn insisted. "It's so generous. almost too generous. Nita watched his face carefully. $12 million for someone she knew only a few months. Arthur's smile was practiced, perfect. Evelyn saw something in you, Nita. She told me you reminded her of herself at your age, strong, independent, willing to do whatever it takes to survive. The words were carefully chosen. Arthur was already building his narrative, Nita as the manipulative nurse who convinced a dying woman to change her will. "I'd like to check your blood pressure one last time," Nita said, producing the modified pulse oximeter. "You've been under tremendous stress." "Always the professional," Arthur chuckled, extending his finger. "Even at my wife's funeral." The device beeped normally as it registered his pulse and oxygen levels. Arthur didn't notice the micro-needle's tiny prick, or the nearly invisible drop of medication entering his bloodstream. 20 minutes later, as Arthur delivered his eulogy about Evelyn's peaceful passing, the ipecac took effect. He doubled over mid-sentence, vomiting violently into the flower arrangements. Nita immediately stepped forward with a biohazard bag, professionally collecting the sample while appearing to help. To everyone watching, she was the compassionate nurse caring for a grief-stricken widower. But Nita's quick thinking had just provided the evidence that would destroy Arthur's empire. The following Tuesday, Arthur hosted his annual charity auction at the Willowbrook Country Club, the Evelyn Hudson Neurotoxicity Research Fund. Local news cameras captured him, presenting a check for $50,000 to Maine Medical Center, playing the role of devoted husband, honoring his late wife's memory. That's when FBI agents walked into the ballroom. The vomit sample had tested positive for thallium concentrations matching those found in Evelyn's tissue. Combined with Dr. Mercer's testimony, Evelyn's recordings, and the evidence from Arthur's safe, prosecutors had an airtight case. Arthur Hudson was arrested on live television for the murders of Evelyn Hudson, Lillian Hudson, and Henry Greer. Additional charges included insurance fraud, medical conspiracy, and tampering with government records. The cameras captured his face as handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the same hands that had stirred poison into teacups, the same hands that had whispered compliments while planning murder. But Nita's story doesn't end with Arthur behind bars. The insurance money, $12 million, that Arthur intended to use as evidence against her, became Nita's tool for justice. She established the Ben Whitaker Memorial Clinic in downtown Willowbrook, providing free health care for uninsured workers and their families. 6 months later, on New Year's Eve, the Hudson estate burned to the ground. The fire department called it faulty electrical wiring, but locals suspected the old mansion had simply decided it was time to cleanse itself of decades of secrets. Only one item survived the fire, the Titian painting from Arthur's study, found face down in the snow, unburned and unmarked. Nita now runs the most trusted medical facility in 3 counties. And sometimes, when she checks a patient's pulse, she remembers that justice doesn't always come from the courts. Sometimes it comes from the hands of those brave enough to fight back. Nita's story teaches us something most people never want to face. Wealth doesn't make someone trustworthy. It just makes them more dangerous when they're not. Arthur Hudson had everything society tells us to respect: money, influence, charitable foundations, and a reputation built over decades. He donated to hospitals, sponsored little league teams, and attended church every Sunday. To the outside world, he was the perfect gentleman, the kind of man mothers wanted their daughters to marry. But behind that facade was a predator who used his wealth as both weapon and shield. He bought doctors, judges, and police officers the same way he bought expensive art and vintage wine. Money wasn't just his means, it was his method. Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who seem the most caring. Arthur brought Evelyn tea every night, called it love, and slowly murdered her with kindness. He complimented Nita, made her feel special, while secretly planning her destruction. The scariest monsters aren't the ones who scare you, They're the ones who make you feel safe while they're hunting you. Medical fraud involving wealthy patients happens more often than we'd like to admit. In 2019, a billionaire heiress left $34 million to her nurse, sparking investigations into elder abuse and manipulation. In 2022, a healthcare worker was convicted of slowly poisoning patients while appearing to provide compassionate care. The real tragedy isn't just the victims who died. It's how many people saw the warning signs but stayed silent because challenging wealth and power seemed impossible. Nita could have walked away. She could have taken the insurance money and disappeared, letting someone else deal with the Hudsons. She had every excuse to mind her own business, crushing debt, no family support, and a justice system that protected the wealthy. But she made a choice that changed everything. She trusted her instincts over her fears. That gut feeling when Arthur whispered, "You're beautiful." Nita listened to it. The medical discrepancies that didn't make sense. She investigated instead of ignoring them. When powerful people tried to intimidate her, she got smarter instead of surrendering. Your instincts exist for a reason. They're your brain processing thousands of tiny details your conscious mind misses. The way someone looks at you, inconsistencies in their story, behavior that doesn't match their words. Wealthy predators count on you ignoring those feelings because challenging them seems too risky. But here's what Nita proved: ordinary people have extraordinary power when they refuse to be silenced. She didn't have Arthur's money or connections. She didn't have a law degree or political influence. What she had was courage, determination, and the absolute refusal to let evil win just because it wore expensive clothes. Today, Nita's clinic has treated over 3,000 patients who couldn't afford healthcare elsewhere. She's saved more lives in 5 years than Arthur destroyed in 30. The memorial fund in her husband's name has grown into a movement that's changed healthcare access across rural Maine. Arthur Hudson sits in a maximum security prison, serving life without parole. His empire crumbled, his reputation destroyed, his victims finally at peace. Money can buy a lot of things: silence, corruption, even temporary immunity from consequences. But it can't buy victory over someone who refuses to be bought. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you that good people can win against impossible odds, then subscribe for more extraordinary stories of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary evil. Hit that notification bell because these stories matter. They show us that courage is contagious and justice is possible. Next week, we're diving into the story of a tech billionaire's wife who discovered her husband's company wasn't just stealing data, it was stealing lives. You won't believe what she found in his private files or how she used his own technology against him. Remember, trust your instincts, question authority, and never let anyone convince you that wealth makes someone untouchable.